The man who claims to be Donald Trump's worst nightmare has been elected as New York mayor. At just 34 years old, Zohran Mamdani is the youngest person since the 19th century to take up the post, and the first Muslim. He's run on a slate of progressive policies, rent freezes, city-run food shops and free childcare. But what does the election of this self-proclaimed socialist mean for the British left? Megan, can you give us a quick recap of Mamdani's rise?
Basically, what I find really interesting is that he actually sort of initially started off as a sort of a lackey on Ross Barkan's campaign. Ross Barkan, one of our American affairs columnists, and then, obviously was working in those circles around the Democrats and also democratic socialists in America, and won the primary to be the Democratic candidate for New York mayor in June. And then I think since then, because he's got these, sort of cool millennial style videos, he takes a city bike everywhere. He really seems to have captured the imagination on the left in America, but also more globally. I think, the British left have definitely got very excited about Zoran Mamdani.
Well, that's what I want to talk about now. I do encourage all our listeners and viewers to go and read Ross Barkan's interview with Zoran Mandani, which we ran as a cover story very recently. It's really good. And Freddie Hayward, our US correspondent, has written about Mamdani's rise and was there for some of the events of the election. But I want to talk mainly about what's being said on the British left about this victory, because it's seen as quite significant, George. What did Wes Streeting say about it, for example?
So he said, look, there are lessons for progressives all over the world here, and that it was an inspiring victory. And that obviously surprised some, as Wes Streeting, from a Blairite background, might not be expected to be a natural fan of Zoran Mandani. Wes Streeting likes to win. He recognises a winner, and he's also been making eyes at Labour's soft left, you could say, recently, looking for common ground and someone who wants a more values-led approach. And so I think he's saying that there are lessons we can draw from Mandani in terms of how you take on the authoritarian right and how you deliver on cost of living.
Yeah, I thought it was interesting because it wasn't the uniform response from Labour ministers, was it? Bridget Phillipson seemed to struggle to respond to it when she was in an interview. She said she hadn't really been following the election. What did you think of that response, Megan?
Yeah, I thought it was interesting. I mean, I think Bridget Phillipson, something I think I admire about her is she is very sort of on her brief. And I could very much see that, she's so focused on education, she hasn't had that much time to look more widely. And that's maybe a charitable explanation. But I do think that, Patrick Maguire, formerly of this parish, had a good rant on Times Radio yesterday when he was sort of saying about the MPs who have, like, Wes kind of been like, oh, Mamdani's victory is great, blah, 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 sort of to get a grip, I actually think it's funny thinking about, what if Mamdani were in Parliament? Would he be in the PLP, or would he have had the whip removed like Zara Sultana or, Brian Leishman? Are his actual politics really aligned with this current iteration of the Labour Party? I think it just looked a bit disingenuous to be so happy about the victory of a sort of really honest socialist across the pond. So, yeah, I think Bridget Phillipson's response was maybe a bit more honest than other members of her
and maybe
party.
More of the view that, we can't even win a Senate election in Caerphilly, let alone, mimic these kind of politics.
I think two things can be true.
Yeah.
I agree. It's sort of galling when you have people who probably haven't been following the mayoral race that closely, who suddenly, pin metaphorical Mandani badges to their jackets, and it's sort of jumping on the bandwagon. And anyone who suggests that there's a simple playbook that you can take off the shelf here for UK politics is being sort of woefully naive or misleading. But what I think is telling about this election is it does reflect some of the trends that are reshaping politics across the West. I mean, one is the dominance of cost of living issues. So as you said, Mandani is someone who's sort of inseparable from his policy proposals on that. Policy was his comms essentially. Yeah. And then it's the power of the attention economy. How do politicians stand out in this very fragmented media environment where voters' eyes are being pulled in multiple directions. And who are the politicians who are exploiting that in the UK? It's Nigel Farage, it's Zack Polanski in the Greens, and Ed Davey in his own way with his stunts. And there are voices in Labour. Peter Hyman, a former Keir Starmer advisor, is one of them, written a very interesting Substack this week on how to make Keir Starmer a social media star, just arguing you can't just abandon this arena and stick to that very traditional model of communication. You need to find ways of innovating. So he said, for instance, that Starmer should sit down with 25 voters and listen to their concerns. And that reminds me of one of, I think, Mamdani's most effective videos, which was when he went and interviewed Trump supporters a year ago after Trump had achieved the biggest swing towards him in any states in New York, asking them, why did you vote Trump? Cost of living came up repeatedly. For some, it was concerns over Joe Biden's foreign policy, and took the time to listen and reflect. So I think two things are true, that any simple read across from this election is wrong, but are there lessons you can draw from it? As with many recent elections, of course.
Yeah, I was speaking to someone who worked on Zack Polanski's social media during his Green leadership campaign. And after Mamdani's election, I asked him, what kind of lessons are there to learn for the Labour Party and the wider left, social media-wise? And he made the point that the reason the Mamdani videos do so well, first of all, he comes across as an authentic figure. He hooks you in very quickly in the video, so you don't swipe past, with some kind of interesting thing to look at, whether it's in New York or I think he jumped into the river to represent rent freezes, for example. So something very visually arresting. But also he made the point that all the videos, there's a consistency there in tone. Whereas I think when you look at Labour's TikTok and Reels, it's just like they're throwing loads of different things at the wall and seeing what works. And it's very obvious that's what they're doing. And he also said that, it's volume. You've got to do it loads. And it's really time consuming. It can take up to 1 or 2 hours just to film a sort of Mamdani style walking down the street video, which Polanski did a few of. So it's a time consuming thing. It's something you have to take seriously and invest in as well in terms of your staff. So we know Nigel Farage, Robert Jenrick, and this source on Zack Polanski's campaign, they're all in their teens. They're people who are either students or even in school. So you have to also sort of hire someone who's actually from that generation, who knows what captures their generation's attention on these platforms. So I think you're right. I think there's absolutely lessons to be learnt there, and it looks like Labour hasn't quite picked up how to do that social media strategy as well as it could.
Yeah, and I think it's also about having positive associations and clearly standing for something. So it's the same with Donald Trump. You say his name, you think of all of his flagship policies, whether it's build the wall or tax cuts or the peace deal he's trying to achieve. Farage, it's stop the boats, he's against net zero and so on. And I still think even now, when Labour's been in power for almost a year and a half, the citizens, what is your defining policy? Yeah. And the policy that focus groups and polls, and this was true in Caerphilly, that there still defines them as seen as the cut in winter fuel payments. That's the opposite of the positive definition that Mandani had on the cost of living. So Labour actually has policies on employment rights or the renters' rights bill that you could say have something in common with that left Democrat agenda in terms of trying to crack down on bad landlords or bad bosses. Yeah. But is it cutting through? Has it given the party the definition it needs? No.
Mm. Well, and I think something I would say on Mamdani is that he does have his age on his side, because I think being a 34-year-old, you are like a millennial. I think it's more believable coming from him, some of these policies on things like the cost of living and rent controls, because you can sort of see, he's a millennial man living in New York. He met his wife on Hinge. As I said, he gets city bikes everywhere. He kind of does all of these sort of flashy videos that kind of look millennial. They look like something a millennial would make, not in like a cringe way, but in like sort of a more slick way. So I think you can really believe that he knows what he's talking about, because he's he's our guy. Like, you can kind of see that. Whereas Keir Starmer, it's like, he, former director of public prosecutions, is a sir. Like, he seems slightly removed from younger voters. And I actually don't know whether I could see him doing that kind of video without it looking a bit cringe.
Yeah, I think the lessons in all of the social media stuff that I've ever heard, anyone who knows what they're doing in this space say is it's got to be authentic. The person has to look like they're comfortable doing what they're doing, and it has to be sort of on brand. It's quite tricky for Labour to do that when they're torn in all sorts of different directions. So you mentioned the renters' rights and employment rights bill, which could appeal to this demographic. But then Zara Sultana, formerly a Labour MP, when Wes Streeting praised Mamdani's campaign, said Mamdani would have been expelled from the UK Labour Party for the views that he holds. So, I mean, there's a tension there, isn't there, Megan?
Yeah, there completely is. Although I think on the sort of your party front, I actually think that the way your party is looking at it is that we need to take some serious lessons. Because I think that, even the Greens and your party, although they are more aligned with Mamdani, they aren't quite as disciplined in the way that they're operating as he is. I mean, the Greens definitely are more disciplined than your party, but I don't think they've quite got there yet, because Zack Polanski obviously has been doing a lot of very similar things to Mamdani. I mean, literally the day after he won election as the Green Party leader, he did a very Mandani coded video, which was him walking towards the camera, and even sort of the filter on the video was very the same as Mamdani. But with your party, I was speaking to someone yesterday who was saying that actually some of the things that Sultana has said and some of her messaging, actually they think that she and your party in general need to take more lessons from Mamdani in terms of, not talking so much about kind of being anti-imperialist and anti-NATO and all of these things, which obviously are important to people on the left. But actually, if you want to win election, you do what Mamdani has done, which is talking about living standards and the cost of living and rent controls and things like that, things that actually people are feeling, Obviously, the question of Palestine and Gaza and Israel is really, really important, but I don't think it's going to have. It's not like a majoritarian approach to electoral politics. It's quite minoritarian. I think what your party is looking at Mamdani and thinking is that he's making this sort of approach and this left-wing approach better for the majority and more appealing to the majority, if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense, because there are Labour MPs who I've spoken to who cannot understand why their party isn't just relentlessly pushing the cost of living. You were talking about how Polanski's campaign to be Green Party leader has drawn comparisons with that of Mamdani's. What are the similarities? I
think they're both sort of youngish, because Polanski is a fair bit older than Mamdani. I think he's 6. That's not that much. Sorry, Zack. But they're sort of youngish guys, millennial men who people can relate to. I think Polanski has been very sort of clear, and he wants to take a populist approach, being an eco-populist. They're both, using TikTok a lot. I mean, what I think is interesting is that Zack Polanski announced his decision to run in May, and then Mamdani won the primary in June. And I think after that point, you can really see that the Greens kind of started looking at Mamdani and thinking, oh, look, we've got another man whose name begins with Z. Let's capitalise on that. Yeah. And I remember Polanski did that video on a beach where he was talking about the small boats. I think what Zack has really got working in his favour is that he is a former actor, and you can tell he knows he goes into acting mode. And I think that's similar with Mamdani in that they're both quite natural performers. They feel quite comfortable in doing that. So yeah, there's obviously the campaign side. I do know I interviewed Zack Polanski in September, and he said that his team and Mamdani's team had been talking about, doing some sort of meetup or working together, but Polanski doesn't fly, so he can't fly over to New York and go and do a video with Mamdani. It would mean Mamdani coming over here, or them meeting. Maybe Zack could do a Greta Thunberg and get a boat over there, but that would be he could sail, but that would take quite a long time. But so that's slightly unfortunate, but I guess, Zack Polanski is the leader of the Green Party. Not flying is very principled for him. But so I think that's interesting. But I guess Zack Polanski's trying to win a country whereas Mamdani has just won a city, and quite a progressive city.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that's not difficult, but I think Polanski would have to win over sort of like red wall seats and things like that. I saw Luke Akehurst, a Labour MP, tweeting this morning that Mamdani's politics wouldn't go down very well in his constituency. So I think Polanski will have to have a slightly different approach to Mamdani, but I think in terms of communication, you can definitely see where he's been learning the lessons.
Yeah, and I think there's definitely something in, people appreciating someone giving straight answers to questions, even if it's not the answer that they would give or that they would want to hear from a politician. I think it's just more pleasing on the eye to watch a politician be straight talking than to be sort of equivocating around a question, which I think you see so much of from Labour frontbenchers, George.
Yeah, that's it. I mean, and it dates back. I mean, predates the New Labour era, although that's where it's most associated with. But this idea of having the line, which all cabinet ministers will give, and it used to be seen as one of the biggest sins in politics. If there's mixed messaging, if someone goes off message, and if the party line is broken. Now, look, of course, there are some areas where you need absolute consistency. I mean, budget policy is a good example, and all the media who say, oh, actually, we just want politicians to say what they think, they would jump on it the minute that a Labour cabinet minister hinted, oh, I think we should keep the tax pledges 100%. They would jump on any inconsistency. So there's a slight kind of element of double standards here. Yeah. But what I think is true is voters and viewers want to hear politicians speak in their own voice. I mean, a good example of that would be the monologue that Wes Streeting delivered on Laura Kuenssberg recently, where he assailed Sarah Pochin, the Reform MP, for over her racist comments, and I think viewers watching that felt, okay, here's someone he's saying what he means, and we get a sense of who he is and what drives him.
Yeah.
No, I've had people across the party say that from a different, more soft left tradition. Ed Miliband's another example of someone. It's very clear what he stands for, and there's an authenticity there. So, look, I don't. There's no simple playbook to take off the shelf, and this stuff can go badly wrong. It's better not to do it than to do it badly.
Yeah.
But it's just more and more true, I think, that in this fragmented, people don't just want to hear cabinet ministers giving a replica of what their counterpart was saying, on the Today programme just before, because they just switch off. That's the danger. It's not just Labour, the government, being unpopular. It's being seen as irrelevant. Just the actions elsewhere. Yeah. I'm just gonna go back to TikTok, or I'm going to just switch over to GB News, Farage. That's the challenge for Labour, I think.
I think if you look at the sort of social media landscape in Britain, some of the videos that have caught the most public attention and captured the imagination have been from politicians on the right. I'm thinking about that Robert Jenrick fare dodging video at Stratford Station in particular.
The problem for Jenrick is that he's a Conservative. So I mean, that's I think two problems. One, that their brand is still so toxic amongst voters, and then ultimately, does Farage just do that stuff better?
Obviously, you've got Zack Polanski on the left, but again, I was talking to somebody from your party yesterday about where is the sort of talent on the left? Like, obviously, there are talented people. Jeremy Corbyn seems to just, he could do one video and it gets goes completely viral because people absolutely adore him. But as I've written about before, and he will be 80 at the next election. So, he's not exactly a young whippersnapper anymore. So I keep making ageist comments on this podcast. I'm sorry.
You know how old our YouTube listenership is as well.
Yeah. Sorry.
We're going to lose half our audience.
Lol. And then obviously Zara, she is a very effective communicator. People really like her. Young people in particular are really behind her because, again, she's 32, she's relatable. She wears England shirts in interviews. She, the way she tweets is quite sort of millennial or appeals to younger people. But she is quite a controversial leader. The way she's operated in your party thus far has not always been successful. But other than those two people, you know, you've obviously got Faisal Shaheen as well, but she's not pinned her colours to the mast. There is sort of a bit of a dearth of talent on the left. And I think that's a conversation that people in your party are really having, is now they've got this sort of new sortition system where when the policies are voted on at conference, members will have been selected randomly, but they're representative of, you know, all the demographics within the membership. You know, could we see sort of rising stars coming through that way? Do they need to do more outreach, kind of train people up into leadership? But, you know, it is a lot of this, a lot of what we've talked about is down to like the talent and your personality fitting in with this new model of communication, which is quite performative, and you need to be confident in yourself, or at least give the perception that you are. And some politicians, in fact, a lot of politicians aren't always like that. They're a bit awkward, they're a bit nerdy. And so, yeah, I think it is interesting that it's sort of like we've gone from needing politicians to be sort of across their brief, whatever, to now they need to sort of be a triple threat of like really good on YouTube, really good on TikTok, like good for sound bites.
And how much do you need a team of that talent? Because part of the campaign that we've seen, the successful campaign, Mamdani, Trump, even Polanski's Green Leadership campaign, is a bit of a cult of personality thing, isn't it, George?
Yes, which I think is more achievable when you're a mayor or a hyper leader. Yeah. And clearly, Keir Starmer is not aiming to be a hyper leader, but we are still in that era of presidential politics, and I think that's why ruminations on how do we boost kind of Keir Starmer's profile on social media are necessary, because I think if you're just not fighting that battle, then others will.
Yeah, and George, just lastly, I mean, you've been a long time watcher of Sadiq Khan and his mayoralty. I mean, he was the first Muslim mayor of a major Western capital. What lessons could Mamdani draw from his leadership of London?
Sadiq Khan and Mamdani have been in conversation at various points over that campaign. I know his view after the selection, interestingly, was that although Mamdani had won the Democratic selection from the left, he'd have to move towards the centre to win. Actually, I think there's not much evidence he's done that. He's sort of won a clear mandate for his brand of left politics. But I think as to Muslim mayors, I think there's common ground in how you defeat the negative politics of the right, and there are comparisons there. I mean, we'll remember the campaign that Zack ran against Sadiq, a lot of scaremongering over his religion. Mamdani enjoyed the same, and there are the more thoughtful commentators on the right are saying that's kind of scare politics. It just doesn't work unless you've got something positive to say. I mean, let's remember that part of Trump's appeal is that actually he doesn't just deal in those kind of tactics, that he's got a sense of optimism and positivity, and if you simply think that sort of scaring the electorate is the route to victory, then you'll be punished. Then look, the New York mayor's actually got more powers than the London mayor. I think Sadiq Khan wants more powers. I mean, it's been a long sort of standing complaint of that. Yeah. But they definitely face a common challenge in that they've made much of cost of living issues, of housing. We've seen recent criticism of Sadiq Khan for not achieving enough on house building. The big challenge for Mamdani now is delivery. Expectations are high. He hasn't done a huge amount to deflate them over the campaign, and to do that, he's going to have to build alliances with Democrats from all wings of the party, and even Republicans. So I think he'll have to be a sort of artful diplomat, and now we'll get a sense of what he's like, not just as a campaigner, but as a politician holding office.